The parking lot was already half full when he pulled in. The same cars in the same spots, and he noticed he still knew exactly where to park without thinking. He shut off the engine and sat for a moment, not because he was late or early, but because the routine had trained his body to pause there. He had been coming to this building long enough that the arrival itself no longer felt like a decision. It felt more like gravity. Inside, the lights were already on. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. The badge reader still hesitated for half a second before unlocking, just as it always had. He remembered when the hesitation bothered him, when he thought it meant the system needed an upgrade. Years later, the pause had become part of the rhythm. He stepped through without noticing it anymore. This job had once felt like a solution. It arrived during a busy period of life when rent was due every month and health insurance mattered more than ambition. He had accepted the offer with relief, not excitement. The paycheck covered the basics. The hours were predictable. The benefits were clear. There were no surprises. At the time, that felt like success. In the early years, stability did real work. It allowed him to sign a lease without fear of sudden income gaps. It made grocery shopping quieter in his head. It let him plan vacations months in advance without worrying about approval or cash flow. When friends talked about layoffs or sudden job searches, he felt insulated. He listened politely, then drove home to the same place, unlocked the same door, and slept without checking his email. Life filled in around the job. A partner moved in, furniture was purchased with confidence instead of caution. A car loan felt manageable because the paycheck was reliable. Conversations about the future stayed calm because the present was under control. The job didn't demand much beyond showing up and doing what he already knew how to do. Raises came, but they were modest, enough to notice, not enough to rethink anything. Each year, the number ticked up slightly, and each year, expenses expanded to meet it. Better groceries, a nicer phone, occasional dinners out without checking the menu prices. None of it felt reckless. It all felt earned. Over time, the work itself stopped changing. The tasks repeated. New systems were layered on top of old ones, but the core of the role stayed the same. He became efficient. He finished early. He helped others troubleshoot problems he had solved years ago. His value was steady, but it was also contained. The company knew exactly what they were paying for, and so did he. When new hires arrived, he noticed their starting salaries. They were close to his own, sometimes uncomfortably close. He assumed it would balance out later, that loyalty would show up eventually in a meaningful way. It always seemed reasonable to wait one more cycle, one more review, one more year. Outside of work, responsibilities increased. A mortgage replaced rent. Property taxes arrived on schedule. Repairs came without warning. The house felt like progress, but it also locked in a higher monthly requirement. The job stability became less of a comfort and more of a necessity. The idea of disruption felt heavier now. There was more to protect. At family gatherings, conversations shifted. People talked about retirement accounts, college savings, long-term planning. He nodded along. His numbers weren't alarming, but they weren't impressive either. They were fine. Fine became the word he used most often when thinking about money. Fine was safe. Fine was survivable. He didn't feel stuck in a dramatic way. There was no single moment of regret, just a gradual narrowing. Recruiter messages slowed over the years, then stopped. His skills were specific, tied closely to internal systems and processes that didn't exist elsewhere. He hadn't noticed the specialization happening. It felt like mastery at the time. The company went through reorganizations. Titles changed, departments merged, leadership rotated. Through all of it, he stayed. Being known became an asset. He was reliable. He didn't need training. He didn't complain. In meetings, his voice carried weight because it was familiar. Familiarity felt like security. But familiarity also froze his market value in place. The external world moved on. Pay scales shifted. Expectations evolved. New roles emerged that he could have grown into, but he never quite did. He had optimized for continuity, and continuity returned the favor by keeping him exactly where he was. When inflation rose, the paycheck didn't stretch the way it used to. The raises continued, but they felt symbolic. The gap between effort and reward widened quietly. He noticed it first at the grocery store, then at the gas pump, then when insurance premiums adjusted upward. Each increase was manageable on its own. Together, they formed pressure. He compensated by cutting small things, fewer meals out, delayed purchases, subscriptions quietly canceled. None of it felt dramatic enough to trigger action. He told himself this was normal, that everyone was feeling the same squeeze. He wasn't falling behind, he just wasn't moving ahead. At work, younger colleagues talked openly about switching jobs. They spoke in numbers and timelines, about compensation bands and opportunities. He listened from the edge of those conversations, aware that his own timeline felt different. He had history here. That history didn't translate easily into a resume bullet. At night, he sometimes opened job listings. Not seriously, just enough to scan. The requirements felt unfamiliar. The salaries felt distant. The confidence he once had about his professional value had thinned over time. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt solid enough to lean on. The job had shaped his days in subtle ways. Lunch at the same time, breaks at the same intervals, commutes measured to the minute. His life fit neatly around it. That neatness made everything else easier, but it also dulled his sense of choice. He didn't remember deciding to stay, he just kept showing up. Financially, the long-term cost wasn't a single missed opportunity. It was the accumulation of small differences. Lower raises compounded over years, retirement contributions grew slower, savings targets drifted further out. None of it triggered alarms, it just recalibrated what was possible. He noticed it when a coworker retired. The farewell was polite, understated. Years of service condensed into a short speech and a cake. He did the math quietly afterward, comparing timelines. The numbers didn't scare him, but they didn't reassure him either. They simply existed. The job still paid on time. The benefits still worked. There was no crisis forcing a change. That was the problem. Stability rarely announces its cost. It spreads it out so thin that it blends into daily life. By the time the total becomes visible, the structure of life is already built around it. At home, conversations about money stayed practical. Bills, repairs, plans that extended a few years ahead, not decades. He wasn't failing. He wasn't succeeding in any way that felt expansive either. He occupied a middle space that looked responsible from the outside and felt quietly constraining from the inside. He remembered turning down an opportunity years earlier. The timing wasn't right. The risk felt unnecessary. The job he had was good enough. He didn't regret the decision at the time. Looking back, it wasn't the missed opportunity itself that mattered. It was the pattern it reinforced. Each choice to stay made the next choice heavier. Not impossible, just heavier. The mortgage, the benefits, the familiarity all added weight. Leaving would require more energy than staying ever did. Staying required almost none. The company eventually announced another restructuring. Nothing dramatic, just adjustments. Roles shifted. Responsibilities redistributed. His workload increased slightly. The compensation did not. He accepted it without protest, not because he agreed, but because this was how things worked here. The job had become a fixed point in his financial life, reliable, predictable, and limiting. It didn't ruin him. It didn't elevate him either. It kept him balanced in a narrow band of outcomes that he had learned to navigate well. He still parked in the same spot, still walked the same hallway, still knew exactly how long the badge reader would hesitate. The familiarity had done its job. It had protected him during the years when protection mattered most. Now, the cost had already been paid, not in one payment, but in installments, in earnings that never quite caught up, in options that quietly expired, in a career that remained intact but contained. He shut down his computer at the end of the day and packed up without rushing. Tomorrow would look the same. That was the point, and that was the price.